Hi, and welcome to Medallia and 3CLogic's webinar about how to supercharge your contact center with Medallia and 3CLogic for ServiceNow. My name is Casey. I'm a Senior Director of Alliances here at Medallia. I'm here with G, my colleague at 3CLogic, who's the VP of Business Development and Partnerships.
Thanks for having me, Casey.
Glad to have you. And just before we get started, a quick reminder that any purchase decision that you make, please only make that based off of currently available product functionality. So let's get started. So in today's environment, customer experience is more important than ever, and nearly 3/4 of customers say that it's actually critical to their purchase decisions. But there's a huge gap, and most brands just aren't delivering according to customer expectations. And even worse, 1/3 of customers will actually walk away from a brand after one bad experience. And this disconnect is also the opportunity for most companies, because for the companies that get the experience right, they have an average of 5 times greater revenue growth over those that don't. And so, G, what do you think about that?
Well, look, I don't think anybody's going to debate that customer experience is important, right? And the impact, both positive and negative, if done right or done incorrectly. What I think is interesting is sort of what's happening this age of digital transformation, right? On one end, customers will tell you that they would much rather self-service any inquiry that they might have, especially when it addresses simple requests, maybe something like a password reset. But these same individuals really have a very low tolerance for bad experiences. So case in point, the vast majority, almost 3 in 4, will tell you that if they have a single bad experience with a chatbot, that they'll just stop using it altogether. And so that creates sort of some pressures for organizations to be able to meet the self-service requirements that customers have, but then also, if done correctly, also address the other forms in which they might receive those requests, which of course is going to reach your contact center. And when we talk about contact centers, which is obviously today's topic, you look at the agents compared to a year ago, they will tell you that they are dealing with more complex issues, servicing more products, and the vast majority at one point or another have actually suffered burnout. And you can attribute a lot of that to the fact that agents are actually doing everything but helping customers. The vast majority of their time, just over 60%, is actually spent really overcoming the technologies that they're expected to use and the manual processes that they're currently being forced to process. That's where their time is being spent. So it's overcoming the technologies, the training, things like manual note-taking. That's eating up the majority of their time at the expense of doing what we would hope your contact center and agent team would be doing, which is helping customers. So there's an interesting set of challenges that organizations are currently trying to solve for, while of course meeting the expectations of customers to really hit those CX metrics and reap the benefits that you allude to, Casey. At the same time, you look at the different channels, a vast majority of customers are using just about every channel there is. So it's everything from chat, chatbot, voice, email, knowledge bases, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the channels they choose to use is typically going to be very contingent on the context, maybe the severity or the complexity of the request. You'll find that even today in this digital transformation era, phone and email is still the predominant, arguably still the most successful forms of customer engagement that there are. And so you want to make sure that those channels are being woven side by side into the digital work streams that you're building and putting together to hopefully solve for these customer experience challenges that every organization right now is wrangling with.
Yeah, that's really interesting, G. And I think it raises an interesting question of, why are these challenges coming up and what's stopping us from moving beyond these hurdles? And I think a lot of what's happening is that oftentimes each product that a company is using for their technology is actually individually procured by different departments as point solutions. And then these silo technologies not only make the customers feel like the company is disjointed, but the agents themselves have to swivel chair and switch between too many systems in order to do their jobs. And so this silo technology leads to too many manual processes. It leads to a disconnect between the front office employees who are the face of the company to the customers in the back office who's trying to solve for specific technology problems without a unification strategy. And so without unification, insights are limited, coaching is stunted, and the customer experience is just inconsistent. And so, how do you think we solve for that?
Yeah, so Casey, honestly, it's doing the opposite of everything you just listed. The reality is that, to your point, organizations are the victims of the 50 years worth of legacy platforms that they've acquired by department over those many years. And we're at a point now where a lot of enterprise organizations are seeking to consolidate those platforms and simplify their tech stack. And if you do that, then all of a sudden you have the makings of a solution, a platform, or foundation that's going to allow you to automate repetitive agent and administrative tasks. That's also going to allow you to unify the systems and different channels of engagements that you have available to your customers. So now agents aren't swivel chairing between channels, neither are customers. It's a single pane of glass, a single point of engagement, even if it's between digital, voice, or all the many channels that we discussed. And then you can use, obviously, this year's buzzword, artificial intelligence, AI, to help automate the analysis of those interactions, not just a subset of them, but all of them. So you can have a better understanding of what is the quality of those engagements between you and your customers, and then use that to optimize the coaching that you might then cater, personalize to different agents that are responsible for delivering those different outcomes. And so again, it's just an easier, said than done type of challenge. But luckily we have platforms like that of ServiceNow, which we're going to cover, that make those types of outcomes and strategies feasible.
Yeah, that's great. I want to actually focus a little bit with regard to solving for this, G. I want to actually focus a little bit on that phone channel that you mentioned that is still a huge preference for so many customers. And with the digital transformation that has been happening, and as we said, we talked about how phone is still top of the list for many customers and how they want to interact. I still see that the voice channel is often overlooked because the desire is often to reduce it. So it's one of the last mediums that hasn't been properly incorporated into the modern enterprise stack. But it is still the medium that customers leverage for their most complex and critical issues. And in fact, 90% of those most complex and critical issues still come through the voice channel. And on top of that, the people responsible for delivering the customer experience, the front office, those agents, they're still not empowered through their technology and coaching to break down these silos as companies move to more digital channels. And paradoxically, through lack of analysis, opportunities for self-service are sometimes even overlooked. And so voice is a relevant channel now and is going to be a relevant channel tomorrow. And as technology and AI evolve, we may move more towards calls being delivered by AI bots, but the voice channel itself is not going away, and agents themselves will still remain relevant, particularly for those very complex issues. And so, the way I see it is the traditional contact center customer experience is being reinvented right now, but not in a way that gets rid of voice. And since nearly 3/4 of contact center executives have difficulty analyzing their data today, the companies that can analyze their data properly and therefore can act on their customer interactions appropriately and can drive the right investments will lead the way in knowing how to evolve. And so let's get into the solution a little bit. I'd love to hear a little bit more about ServiceNow that you mentioned before, G.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more with everything you just said, Casey. We talk to our car, we talk to our phones. I think voice as a channel is going through a very interesting, evolution, depending on your point of view. And I couldn't agree with you more. Maybe it'll be more chatbot or voice bots in the future and less agents, but both are going to be relevant. And it's the application within a broader CX strategy that we're going to be covering, that we're talking about today. So when you look at, how enterprises can solve for that, taking into account the challenges you and I have alluded to up until this point, you look at a platform like ServiceNow. So if you look at, to our comment about organizations having many platforms, many workflow streams, and so on and so forth, this breakdown between the front office and the back office, you look at a platform like ServiceNow, all of a sudden you can help unify all those different streams into a single set of workflows. You can also consolidate the knowledge to some of the questions that your agents are expected to have the answer to, or for that matter, the answers to the questions that customers may choose to pose directly to your organization available. You can use AI and machine learning to optimize those things. You have playbooks and so on and so forth. Effectively, you can use ServiceNow as a way to really foundationally unify and overcome and connect all of these back office processes, platforms, and workflows into a single foundational data model. If you do that, then all of a sudden, to my earlier point, you can now solve for the different engagement points that you have with customers. And that's where 3CLogic can come into the equation. So while ServiceNow comes native with its own digital channels, chat, live chat, knowledge, and so forth, when customers do choose to reach out to your organization through the contact center for more complex requests, to your point, you don't want that to be a forgotten medium. You want that to be brought in and wove it into the fabric of this digital transformation strategy that you've presumably built on and with ServiceNow. And so 3CLogic becomes sort of that engagement layer and complement to ServiceNow without introducing any duplicate capabilities, right? We don't want customers paying for the same thing twice, but bring in things like conversational AI, voice self-service, live agent, and intelligent routing, optimization of the agent and their day-to-day tasks, right? How can we help them avoid taking notes between calls and instead focusing on helping the next person? Real-time dashboards and wallboards, call recordings, and so forth. Now, if you have these two foundational layers in place, ideally now you've built the makings of a single solution, right? This isn't point-to-point integrations between two different platforms that may ultimately have competing capabilities. Instead, you have two complementing solutions that are both driving towards a single CX outcome, right? And then with that, then you can bring in, of course, what you guys specialize in at Medallia, which is all the analysis that can help you determine the success of what you've built so far. Right, Casey?
Yeah, absolutely. I love how you laid that out. And the way that we think about Medallia, you see here the see and act everywhere layer. But whether that be through call analytics, like we're talking about today, or other customer signals, whether that be traditional surveys or social media data, digital behaviors, Medallia's aim is really to actually understand 100% of customer interactions, right? Because feedback can be explicit or it can be implicit. And so we want to be able to analyze all of that and bring the point of the view of the customer to the table. And from there, actually analyze, assess, and drive action to every person within the organization. And we want to do that in their system of engagement. So back to what you were talking about, ServiceNow as being this foundational layer, a lot of the people who need to act on this data are doing their work in ServiceNow. So we want to be thinking about the analysis that Medallia provides and how we route the right actions and workflows right into ServiceNow to be able to drive a lot of these business results that we're aiming for. So I was thinking now we can actually get into, as it relates to the voice channel, how ServiceNow, 3CLogic, and Medallia all work together to actually deliver on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, ServiceNow really starts as a system of action within this flow, right? So the customer comes in, they call, they're submitting a case, a ticket, depending on the audience. Are you certain, is it an employee, a customer? And where 3CLogic immediately comes into play is we're going to be that point of ingestion. So for today's purposes, let's say it's someone that's calling in. When they call in, just because they call, that doesn't mean that they automatically have to be routed to a live agent, right? So can we leverage the information from ServiceNow, knowing about the caller, their case, anything that's available in ServiceNow is available to us. So one single data model makes that possible. And can we determine, intelligently where we should route this to, right? Can this be serviced through an intelligent AI, human-like experience? Or do we need to collect some information to determine who is the most skilled agent or live agent that might otherwise be better suited to service the inquiry? And even in that experience, how do we automate things like, presenting to the agent all the relevant information that they might need about the customer? Can we do fancy things like real-time transcription that can help also understand as a conversation progresses, what are some of the assets that may help the agent during the course of that interaction so that they don't have to go put the person on hold and, source and find that information in a different, platform. And then how can you also provide the dashboards and the call recording, which of course can parlay into additional assets that will come in handy when it comes to the assessment of the call, which of course that's where Medallia comes in. We provide that information both to Medallia and both to ServiceNow so that it becomes actionable assets, right? It's not hidden in a vacuum, but then is subject to, of course, the analysis that Medallia obviously specializes in.
Yeah, I mean, it's not possible to sit there and listen to every single call that comes into your contact center. And so what Medallia does is when we get that call from 3CLogic, right, we not only transcribe it in order to understand, what's actually being said, what the customer is saying, what's the agent saying, but we're also looking at voice analytics on top of that. We're measuring things like overtalk time and silence time and emotional trends. We're also laying our speech and text analytics and our AI on top of the transcript at the individual phrase level to be able to understand the sentiment and even some of the implicit feedback that's coming through in that call, understanding how we can drive coaching workflows, how we can drive customer follow-up, how we can drive actual changes in the organization and understand where we might need to take action based off of what is happening in that individual call. We'll talk about a bit later how we start to roll that data up in order to make proper investment decisions, but we also want to think about that individual interaction and how we couple that with other data that we have about that customer to be able to understand how we can resolve that issue, whether it's to improve from an agent coaching perspective or to improve the customer experience. And from there, we're going to route some of those insights into ServiceNow. And so I'll pass it back to you, G, to talk about what happens from there.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, right, when 3CLogic and Medallia have provided or contributed, what we specialize in, the goal is to get it back into ServiceNow. Because again, we're treating ServiceNow as the foundational bedrock to this customer experience effort, initiative, solution, right? So, if we provide the call transcription, the call summarization, right, using AI, the sentiment scoring and the analysis that Medallia brings to the equation, when you group all that back and put it back into ServiceNow can now action off of those items, right? So based on the experience of said call, do we need to do anything with the customer? Is there a follow-up that needs to happen? Is there a survey that needs to be sent out? Is there something that needs to be done with the case specifically itself? Are there resolution notes that we can use to then parlay into updating the knowledge base? So you have this sort of perfect feedback loop where the system of action, that's where everything started. It goes through this set of interactions, it goes through the analysis, and then we're going back and then enriching ServiceNow with those insights so that you can continuously improve what is ultimately a workflow end to end, but that incorporates the contact center and the analysis as opposed to what is the traditional model, which is really a broken model, where the contact center solution is really providing its services independently of where the work actually happens. And so now you've unified the agent experience, you've simplified the administration of those teams as well as the analysis, and ultimately the customer and the customer experience is what's going to stand to benefit the most.
Yeah, this time of analytics, and this is really that unification and that consolidation of that tech stack that we were talking about before. And this type of analytics, this type of driving employees into their system of engagement, allowing the agent to stay in ServiceNow is what leads to some of these amazing business results. So I'll just highlight one here around improving customer loyalty. And one of our customers, North American financial institution, they started using these types of speech analytics to actually understand 100% of their calls. And this led to a 15% increase in NPS, really driving up that customer loyalty, while at the same time reducing the average call duration by 20%. So also saving from a cost perspective. So it's really a win-win there. G, I don't know if you wanted to highlight another story here.
I mean, look, for our audience, at their will, they're more than welcome to look at all these different stories that obviously are creating, meaningful value in different industries, I might mention. In our case, one that draws my attention that I know we affected together with ServiceNow was for a major healthcare organization, which was UW Health. They were actually suffering from a couple of problems. One, they wanted to solve for the agent workspace. They wanted the agents to have a single agent workspace, and they platformed on ServiceNow Service Operation Workspace. And what they wanted was for the contact center to be a complement to that initiative. So together with 3CLogic, we delivered them a single agent solution built on ServiceNow foundationally. So all the data was in ServiceNow, but the contact center was an extension of those workflows. And they were able to start affecting call deflection, self-service, in addition to doing a better job with how to route people to the appropriate agent so that they could avoid duplicate calls, duplicate requests, and really get that first call resolution improvement. And one of the things that they were able to measure was what was the operational cost impact. And they actually estimated that in its aggregate, it was about $2 million in operational savings, thanks to this sort of unified solution between 3CLogic, ServiceNow, and everything else that we bring to bear. So these are not pie in the sky outcomes that you and I are talking about or use cases. These are things that are already being actioned by customers successfully in the field.
Yeah, phenomenal results. And I think what might help is actually just to go through a little bit of a preview of how this would actually look and how this really works behind the scenes in the next couple of slides.
Yeah. So look, there's nothing like a live demonstration. So I encourage our audience to, at some point, if anything we've said is of interest and piqued their interest, then let us know. And ourselves and Medallia are more than happy to dive in and show you exactly, how things look behind the curtain. But step one is if you're trying to affect self-service or just intelligent routing, again, you can't prevent people from calling, but it's up to you to determine if it's something that is simple enough to self-service or requires the input of a live agent. One of the things you want to be able to do is basically affect those engagement interaction workflows without having to rely on an independent contact center team or specialist or outsourcer and so forth, right? we've seen time and time and again, a lot of enterprises, what happens is the procurer of ServiceNow that's started this digital transformation effort is able to control the digital channels, but then the contact center is bought and administered by a separate team. So if they want to change the experience that a caller might go through, they can't, or they can't without necessarily really being hostage to another group. What you have here on screen is an example of an embedded, 3CLogic in this case, embedded interaction manager that allows you to administer those contact center experiences without ever having to leave the ServiceNow platform. And at the same time, allow it to connect and ingest relevant ServiceNow data points so that you can create adaptable queues and adjust experiences and so forth, and really optimize the experience of the caller as well as the agents and everything in between, right?
Yeah, that's great. And then where do they go from there?
Well, look, like I said, not every call necessarily has to go to a live agent, but if it has to, right, how can you optimize the agent, right? We mentioned earlier that one of the things that's withholding agent performance is the fact that they spend, 2/3 of their time overcoming technology. That's really not what they were brought on to do. So can you help with intelligent screen pops? Can you pre-populate or even pre-fill a case or an incident before it even reaches them with the short description, the priority, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Those seconds, sometimes minutes saved, affect everything. Operational costs, the customer experience, the agent's happiness in the role, right? So obviously retention of agents has always been a big challenge for contact centers. And then how it can use more advanced capabilities, AI capabilities like real-time transcription, sentiment, and so forth, post-call notes and activities to really help support the agent throughout the entire interaction, right? And ultimately what that means is hopefully you're scaling the team to be able to process more requests without necessarily always having to throw headcount at the problem.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And then, from there, once we do that handoff, right, and Medallia gets that call recording, what we do, I mentioned before that we're going to transcribe every single call with high accuracy, readability, can play this back in multiple languages, but we're also capturing voice metrics. I mentioned before, things like silence time, overtalk time. One of the things I find really interesting is actually seeing the trending of the emotional tone of both the customer and the agent. And we're analyzing that sentiment or surfacing whether there's potential churn risk from that call, whether there's suggestions that are coming up, scoring that customer effort. We're actually scoring every single interaction as well. So we're analyzing at the phrase level because we can't just say, oh, this call was good and this call was bad, right? It's usually far more complex than that. There might be that an agent didn't adhere to the script and they might have missed a certain behavior that they're supposed to do, but the customer might have been happy with the experience at the same time. And so how do we start to parse out all of those different things that are happening within each interaction? And then how do we score that overall interaction so you can start to flag and highlight some of the calls that need to be focused on for coaching and for driving some of the business results? And as we roll that data up, here's where we can start to layer a lot of that AI and text analytics that we're on top of each other that we're bringing from each individual call. So we're going to run every single call through our engine, right? But then we start to quantify these things. Where are opportunities for self-service based on what the customer is actually saying in the call, right? Where are they struggling? Where are the agents struggling? How do we compare some of these things that are coming up to be able to say, hey, when people are talking about this particular thing, right, this is actually driving a huge increase, right, in your average handle time, right? Or here's how we can actually improve first call resolution based on the things that are actually happening. So as we think about where to invest in that digital transformation, right, we know based on the actual data from customers themselves and from this call scoring, but where to invest our money. And at the same time, we can provide that great experience. You mentioned retention before for the agents as well to help them improve and do better at their jobs and learn where they can really grow and help customers in a better way. And, from there, as we mentioned before, we want to route this data back into ServiceNow. And so, G, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so look, I think at the end of the day, if things start in ServiceNow, they should end there as well, right? And you want to continue that cycle. So it's how the three solutions, ServiceNow being sort of the bedrock, 3CLogic, the contact center and engagement layer, and then Medallia as the analytical layer, how those three can really continue to optimize what is ultimately a singular goal, which is improving the customer experience, which is going to affect retention, it's going to affect operational costs, it's going to affect revenue growth, et cetera, et cetera. So what you have here is an example of how in ServiceNow you can associate, whether it's for ServiceNow interaction, a case, an incident, a service request. So Again, this is not unique to customer experience. This could also apply to other ServiceNow verticals, whether it's employee workflows or IT service management. But you can see here highlighted is the call transcription, right? With that call transcription are the sentiment outcomes that Medallia detected. And the benefit there is now ServiceNow is not blind to those interactions. And we, 3CLogic and Medallia, are also not holding it hostage. If ServiceNow is a system of action, at some point we have to provide them those outcomes, those results, so that ServiceNow can then determine, okay, what do we need to do? What type of cases are we getting, and which ones, are we having the most trouble resolving? Which ones are creating the most amount of conflict, frustration, things of that nature. And those insights are what are going to allow you to really optimize the contact center experience. But again, still foundationally connected back to ServiceNow and making sure that there's now a clean bridge, between what's happening in the front office, which obviously the contact center is a part of, and then all the back office efforts that are there to make, to solve for those front office inquiries, right? So connecting the back office to the front office. And so the only way that's possible is if we can, in fact, at the end of this equation, enrich ServiceNow with the assets and insights that 3CLogic and Medallia uniquely have and create.
Amazing. I know there's so much more we could talk about with regard to this, and I really encourage a lot of you on the call today to reach out to us to talk about it some more, but I do want to leave some time for any questions that might come up. So feel free to put those in the chat and I will see what comes through. All right. So we have a question here. Gee, I think this is a good one for you. So what's the biggest hurdle preventing organizations from implementing this approach?
Yeah, that is a good question. Look, I think it goes back to what we, listed as one of the primary challenges, which is enterprises are really anchored down by 50 years worth of platforms and purchases and technology. And so while those may have been great at a department level for any type of interdepartment workflow, that's where all of a sudden the breakdown starts to happen, the delays, and the customer experience suffers as a result. So I think that, the number one thing is you have to build that foundational bedrock. You look at AI, everyone's talking about the benefits that AI is going to bring. The reality is AI, for example, is only as good as the data it has access to. And I would say that argument, really, you can expand it out beyond AI. Your customer experience is only going to be as good as the data, hopefully consolidated data that you have available to you. If you have to swivel chair and source information from different places, have to activate different workflows that otherwise aren't speaking to each other, and then you're also sourcing different channels that may not be universally queued, all of those things in their aggregate are going to impact the ability to solve for some of the challenges that you and I have discussed at length today. So I think really the biggest hurdle is willing to take the time to really clean the garage, if you will, build that foundational base. And we've used ServiceNow today as the example, and then build on top of it. Otherwise, all you're doing is patching things. And that won't last long. And ultimately, the customers will probably be the first ones to notice and be affected by it.
That makes a lot of sense. All right. So we've got another question here. Is this webinar future state or is it possible today? So this is all doable today. We have customers using this technology. We're excited for you guys to use it as well. So what you're actually going to receive in your email is a recording of this session as well as these slides. And we really recommend that you reach out to us with any additional questions that you might have, as well as schedule time to see this technology in action, to hear more about it. As I mentioned before, we really only scratched the surface today. So looking forward to hearing from all of you guys. And thank you so much for your time today.
Yes, thanks. And thanks for allowing me to be a participant, Casey, in today's session.
I appreciate you joining, Dean.